I never thought my neighbor's obsession with orange extension cords would nearly land her in federal prison. But here we are in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, where the summer heat makes people do crazy things. My name is Xavier, and I bought my 3-bedroom ranch house in the Sagebrush Heights subdivision back in 2019. The place was perfect, decent yard, quiet street, and most importantly, it had a detached garage where I could set up my woodworking shop. I'm a freelance furniture maker, and having a dedicated workspace was non-negotiable. The previous owner had installed a proper ventilation system and everything. All I needed to add was my equipment and a reliable backup power source, because monsoon season in Phoenix is no joke. Arizona monsoons are brutal. The storms roll in fast, knock out power for hours or sometimes days, and if you're running a business from home like I am, that's money down the drain. So in March 2024, I invested in a serious generator setup. Not one of those little portable units you get at Home Depot, but a proper Generac standby generator with an automatic transfer switch. Cost me nearly $8,000 installed, but it was worth every penny. The thing could power my entire house and shop for days on a full propane tank. The generator sat on a concrete pad behind my garage, perfectly positioned according to code. I had the electrical inspector out, got all my permits, everything by the book. The unit was whisper quiet compared to the old portable generators, and it automatically kicked on within seconds of losing grid power. For my shop equipment, my refrigerator, my air conditioning during those brutal summer nights, it was a lifesaver. But here's where things got complicated. My detached garage was about 40 feet from my house, and while the generator could power both through the main panel, I sometimes needed to run specific tools that required dedicated circuits. So I invested in heavy-duty generator cords, the kind rated for outdoor use, with proper weather-resistant connectors. These weren't cheap hardware store extension cords. These were professional-grade cables, 12-gauge wire, rated for 20 amps, with bright orange jackets for visibility and safety. I kept them neatly coiled when not in use, and when I needed them, I'd run them from the generator to my shop, or sometimes across my yard to power outdoor projects. I was always careful, never ran them where people could trip, always elevated them on cord protectors when they crossed walkways. Safety was my priority because I'd seen what happened when people got careless with electrical equipment. Everything was fine for about 14 months. I ran my business, paid my bills, waved to neighbors. The HOA left me alone, which was exactly how I liked it. Sagebrush Heights had an HOA, of course, because every subdivision built after 1990 in Phoenix apparently requires one by law or divine mandate or something. The monthly fees were reasonable. They maintained the common areas, and mostly they stayed out of everyone's business. Then Brenda Morrison got elected HOA president in May 2025. Brenda was exactly what you'd picture when someone says, HOA Karen. 52 years old, highlighted blonde hair always styled in that aggressive bob cut, designer sunglasses that cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and an SUV with a bumper sticker that said, I speak my mind because I have one. She lived 3 houses down from me in a pristine 2-story with a yard so manicured it looked like AstroTurf. I'd exchanged maybe 5 words with Brenda before she became HOA president. She'd moved into the neighborhood about 2 years after me, and mostly kept to herself, except for occasionally complaining at HOA meetings about trivial nonsense. People told me she'd run for president specifically because the previous president, a retired accountant named Phil, had approved someone's request to paint their front door navy blue instead of the approved slate blue. Brenda thought this was an unconscionable violation of neighborhood standards. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in early June. I was in my shop finishing a custom dining table when someone started pounding on my front door like they were serving a warrant. I walked over, sawdust still on my clothes, and found Brenda standing on my porch with a clipboard and an expression that could curdle milk. "Henry Xavier," she said, like she wasn't sure, even though she'd lived down the street for 4 years. "That's me. What can I do for you, Brenda?" "I'm here in my official capacity as HOA president," she announced, tapping her clipboard. "We've received complaints about your generator cords." I blinked. "My what?" "Your generator cords, the orange ones. They're visible from the street, and they violate Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA covenants regarding outdoor storage of equipment and materials." I stepped out onto the porch, genuinely confused. "Brenda, I don't have any cords visible from the street right now. They're all stored in my garage." She gestured dramatically toward my property. "But you do use them, and when you do, they're visible. I have photographs from 3 weeks ago showing orange cords across your yard. I was building a pergola for the Hendersons down the street. I needed power for my tools. The cords were up for maybe 6 hours total. 6 hours of violation is still a violation, Henry. The covenants are very clear. No outdoor storage of equipment, materials, or supplies visible from the street or adjacent properties. They weren't stored outside. They were in use. That's completely different." Brenda's expression hardened. "The HOA board has voted to implement a new policy regarding generator cords. Effective immediately, all generator extension cords must be white, beige, or gray to blend with residential landscaping. Orange cords are prohibited." I actually laughed, thinking she was joking. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You have 30 days to comply or face a fine of $100 per day. Brenda, those cords cost $200 each. I have 4 of them. Professional-grade generator cords only come in orange or yellow for safety reasons. It's literally an OSHA standard. The bright color prevents people from tripping over them. Then you'll need to find alternative solutions. Perhaps you could paint them. Paint electrical cords." "That's insane, not to mention dangerous. Paint could crack and expose the wiring." She made a note on her clipboard. "I'm documenting your refusal to comply. The 30-day notice period begins today. Have a good day, Henry." She turned and walked back to her SUV, leaving me standing on my porch trying to process what just happened. An HOA rule about extension cord colors. This had to be the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. I went back inside and immediately pulled up the HOA covenants online. I'd read them when I bought the house, but that was years ago. Section 12, Paragraph 4 did mention outdoor storage, but it specifically referenced permanent or semi-permanent storage of materials, vehicles, equipment, or supplies. Nothing about temporary use of electrical cords. Nothing about colors. This was Brenda inventing rules that didn't exist. I called my neighbor Tom, who'd lived in Sagebrush Heights since the subdivision was built. Tom was retired military, practical as they come, and had served on the HOA board years ago. "Tom, did you hear about this new generator cord rule?" "Oh yeah," Tom said, and I could hear the disgust in his voice. "Brenda announced it at last month's meeting. I told her it was ridiculous, but she'd already gotten 2 other board members to vote for it. Real estate agent Susan, and that guy Derek who just bought the house on Cactus Drive. Can she even do this? The covenants don't say anything about cord colors. Technically, the board can implement reasonable guidelines for enforcing existing rules, but reasonable is the key word. Most HOA rules can be challenged if they are arbitrary or capricious. You might want to talk to a lawyer. I didn't want to talk to a lawyer. I wanted to run my business in peace. But I also wasn't about to spend $800 replacing perfectly good equipment because Brenda didn't like the color orange. The next day, I drafted a formal response to the HOA. I cited the actual covenant language, pointed out that my cords were never stored outside, explained the safety reasons for orange cord colors, and requested the rule be rescinded. I sent it certified mail to the HOA's official address, which was a P.O. box that Brenda managed. 2 weeks later, I got a response. It was a form letter saying my complaint had been reviewed and denied, and that the 30-day compliance deadline remained in effect. The letter was signed by Brenda as president, Susan as vice president, and Derek as treasurer. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, which was scheduled for the last Wednesday of June. The meetings were held in the clubhouse by the neighborhood pool, and attendance was usually sparse. Most people paid their fees and ignored the HOA entirely, which was probably how Brenda liked it. When I walked into the clubhouse at 7 that evening, only about a dozen other homeowners were there. Tom gave me a nod from the back row. Brenda sat at a folding table up front with Susan and Derek, looking very official with her gavel and parliamentary procedure manual. The meeting started with standard business, reading of minutes, treasurer's report, discussion of landscaping contracts. Then came new business. "We have a compliance matter to discuss," Brenda announced. Xavier has failed to comply with the board's directive regarding generator cords. The 30-day notice period expires in 12 days. I raised my hand. "I'd like to address that." Brenda looked annoyed but nodded. "You have 3 minutes. I stood up. "The rule you're trying to enforce doesn't exist in our covenants. Section 12 prohibits outdoor storage, which isn't what I'm doing. I use professional-grade electrical cords temporarily for my business. These cords are orange for safety reasons. It's an industry standard. Requiring me to replace or paint them is arbitrary, expensive, and potentially dangerous." A few people nodded. One guy I didn't know said, "Yeah, that does seem kind of excessive." Brenda banged her gavel. "The board has determined that visible orange cords constitute a visual nuisance under the Aesthetic Standards Clause. The decision stands." "What Aesthetic Standards Clause?" I pulled out my printed copy of the covenants. "I've read this document front to back. There's no clause about aesthetics beyond the original architectural guidelines for house construction." Susan, the real estate agent, cleared her throat. She was maybe 40, always dressed like she was about to show $1 million property. "Henry, as a real estate professional, I can tell you that non-conforming visual elements can impact property values. We have a responsibility to maintain home values for all residents. My orange extension cords that are visible maybe one day a month are going to tank property values. That's absurd." Derek, a thin guy in his 30s who worked in tech, added, "It's about setting standards. If we let one person have orange cords, next thing you know everyone's got different colored cords and hoses and equipment everywhere." "That's a slippery slope fallacy," I said. "And besides, most people don't even have generators. This rule affects maybe 3 households in the entire subdivision." Brenda banged her gavel again. "This discussion is closed. You have 12 days to comply or fines will begin accruing. Next item on the agenda." I sat down, frustrated. Tom leaned over and whispered, "Told you, she's on a power trip." After the meeting, several people came up to me and said they thought the rule was stupid. But nobody wanted to formally challenge it. Nobody wanted to volunteer for the board. Nobody wanted to make waves. They all just wanted to go home and live their lives. I spent the next few days researching Arizona HOA law. Turns out, HOAs have broad authority, but they can't enforce rules that are arbitrary, capricious, or inconsistent with the actual covenants. The problem is, challenging them requires either convincing the board to change their mind or taking them to court. Court meant lawyers, and lawyers meant money. I decided to try one more diplomatic approach. I invited Brenda to my house to actually see my setup and understand what I was doing. To my surprise, she agreed. She showed up on a Saturday morning wearing white capri pants and a turquoise blouse, looking around my property like she was conducting an inspection. "Look," I said, walking her to the garage. "These are the cords in question." I showed her the heavy-duty cables, neatly coiled on wall hooks. "These are professional-grade, weather-resistant, rated for outdoor use. When I need them, I run them from my generator to my shop or to outdoor work areas. I use cord protectors when they cross walkways. I never leave them out overnight. This is standard practice for any contractor or tradesperson." Brenda examined the cords with her arms crossed. "They're still orange." "Yes, because that's the safety standard. Orange means high-voltage extension cord. It's visual communication. People see orange and know to be careful. Our neighborhood standards are more important than industry standards." I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "Brenda, why does this matter so much to you? Have any neighbors actually complained?" She turned to me with a tight smile. "I don't need complaints to enforce our community standards. That's what leadership means, Henry, being proactive." "This isn't leadership, it's overreach." Her smile vanished. "You have 9 days to comply. Good day." She walked back to her SUV, and I knew then that this wasn't about cords or colors or community standards. This was about control. Brenda had found something to enforce, and she was going to enforce it because she could. The following Wednesday, 6 days before the deadline, I received a certified letter from an attorney. The law firm of Morrison and Associates, which I quickly discovered was run by Brenda's husband, Kenneth Morrison. The letter was a formal legal demand for compliance, threatening not just HOA fines but also legal action for breach of covenant. This was escalating fast. I called Tom again. She got her husband's firm to send me a legal threat. Tom whistled. "That's a conflict of interest right there. Board members can't use their position to funnel business to family members." "Can I use that?" "Maybe. You'd need to file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They oversee HOA regulations, but that's a long process." I didn't have time for a long process. I had 6 days. I decided to comply, sort of. I went to a specialty electrical supply store and found white cord covers that could slip over my orange cords. They weren't ideal. They'd make the cords slightly less flexible, but they'd technically meet Brenda's color requirement without spending hundreds on new equipment. On the day before the deadline, I sent Brenda photos of my cords now covered in white sleeves. I included a note explaining that this was my compliance effort. She responded within an hour. "Cord covers are not acceptable. The cords themselves must be white, beige, or gray. You are not in compliance." I called the one lawyer I knew, a guy named Marcus who'd helped me with my business LLC paperwork. He listened to my situation and sighed. "Henry, fighting this will cost you more than just buying new cords. It's the principle, Marcus. She's making up rules." "I get it, but HOA litigation is expensive and slow. They've got a legal fund built from everyone's fees. You're one guy. Even if you win, you'll spend thousands. So she just gets away with it. Unless you can get other homeowners to push back, yeah, probably." I hung up feeling defeated. That evening, I sat in my shop staring at my orange cords and seriously considered just buying new gray ones. Maybe I could resell the orange ones to another contractor. Then the monsoon hit. Phoenix monsoons are spectacular and terrifying in equal measure. The storms that roll in during late June and July can bring winds over 70 miles per hour, lightning that turns night into day, and rain that falls so hard you can't see 10 feet in front of you. This particular storm hit on a Friday evening, and it was a big one. The power went out across our subdivision at about 8:30. I was in my house watching TV when everything went dark. Within 10 seconds, I heard my Generac kick on outside, that smooth mechanical hum as it switched over. My lights flickered and came back on. My AC kept running. My refrigerator never stopped. I looked out my front window and saw the rest of the neighborhood in darkness. Street lights out, house lights out, just the occasional flashlight or phone screen visible through windows. The storm raged for about an hour, then passed as quickly as it came. The power didn't come back on. I checked the local utility website and saw that over 15,000 customers were without power in our area, with an estimated restoration time of 24 to 48 hours. I went to bed that night in air-conditioned comfort while my neighbors sweltered in the June heat. The next morning, Saturday, I was up early working in my shop. I had a commission deadline and the generator meant I could keep my schedule. Around 9, someone knocked on my door. It was Tom, looking tired. "Henry, any chance I could run an extension cord from your place to mine, just for my refrigerator? Everything in my freezer's going to spoil." "Of course, man. Let me get you set up." I ran one of my professional orange cords from my generator to Tom's garage, about 60 feet. Used my cord protectors where it crossed the sidewalk. Tom plugged in his refrigerator and a fan, and we chatted for a bit about the storm damage. "Tree came down on Mesquite Avenue," Tom said. "Took out a power line. That's probably why we're going to be out for a while." As we were talking, I saw other neighbors emerging from their houses, looking hot and frustrated. A couple of them saw Tom's setup and came over asking if they could do the same thing. By noon, I had 3 cords running to 3 different houses, all helping people save their food and stay cool with a fan. Around 2 in the afternoon, a white SUV pulled up in front of my house. Brenda. She got out wearing a sundress and looking significantly less put together than usual. Her hair was limp from the heat, and she wasn't wearing her usual designer sunglasses. "Henry," she called out, walking toward me. I was in my driveway adjusting one of the cords. "Brenda." She looked at the orange cords running across my yard and to my neighbors' houses. I waited for her to complain about violations. Instead, she said, "I see you have power." "Yep, generator's working great. How long can it run? Days if needed. I've got a big propane tank." She glanced back at her house 3 doors down. "Our power's out too." "Yeah, whole neighborhood's out. Utility says maybe tomorrow or Monday before it's back." She fidgeted with her car keys. "It's very hot in our house." "I bet. It's going to hit 108 today." There was a long pause. Then, "Would it be possible to run one of your cords to my house?" "Just temporarily, until the power comes back on. I'd pay you, of course." I looked at her, this woman who'd spent the last month making my life difficult over the color of these exact cords. The woman who'd threatened me with fines and legal action. The woman whose husband's law firm had sent me threatening letters. "These orange cords?" I asked. "The ones that violate HOA standards." Brenda's face tightened. "I know we've had our disagreement, but this is an emergency." "Is it an emergency, or is it just inconvenient? Henry, please." "I have medication that needs refrigeration. Insulin for my husband. That changed things. I'm not a monster. Fine. but we're going to have a conversation about this HOA rule. Of course, yes, whatever you need, thank you. I grabbed my longest cord, a 100-foot commercial-grade orange cable, and walked it down to Brenda's house. She followed behind me, quiet for once. When we got there, her husband Kenneth was standing in the garage. He was a tall guy, late 50s, dressed in golf clothes. "This is Henry," Brenda told him. "He's going to give us power." Kenneth looked at me, then at the orange cord in my hands. "Isn't this the guy you've been fining for the cords?" "Kenneth, not now." I ran the cord from my generator down the sidewalk across 2 yards to their garage. Used all my cord protectors at crossing points, plugged it into their garage outlet, and their house system drew power through there. "You'll have about 15 amps available," I told them. "That's enough for your refrigerator, some lights, a couple of fans. Don't try to run your AC or you'll trip the breaker." "This is incredibly generous," Kenneth said, and he actually seemed genuine. "What do we owe you?" "Nothing, just being a good neighbor." Brenda looked uncomfortable. "About the HOA situation?" "Yeah, about that. You see how these orange cords are currently stretched across multiple properties, visible from the street, helping people in an emergency?" "Yes." "You see how they're the exact same cords you've been trying to ban?" "I understand your point." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm standing, these cords have now saved your husband's insulin, Tom's freezer full of food, the Martinez family's ability to sleep with a fan, and the Hendersons' ability to keep their baby's formula cold. All things that wouldn't be possible if I'd followed your ridiculous rule and gotten rid of them." Kenneth looked at Brenda. "You were trying to ban generator cords." "Not ban, just requiring them to be different colors for aesthetic purposes." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Kenneth said. "Brenda, what were you thinking?" "It was about maintaining standards." I jumped in. "It was about control, and now you need the exact thing you were trying to prohibit. So here's the deal. I'll keep your power on through this outage. In exchange, the HOA drops this cord color rule. You send a written apology to all homeowners, and you reimburse me for the lawyer consultation I had to pay for because of your overreach." Brenda looked like she'd swallowed glass. "I'll need to discuss it with the board." "No discussion. Those are my terms. Take it or leave it." Kenneth put his hand on Brenda's shoulder. "We'll take it. Thank you, Henry. Brenda will send you confirmation in writing tomorrow. Make it today. Email works." I left them there and walked back to my house. Tom was on his porch and gave me a thumbs up. He'd watched the whole thing. The power stayed out until Monday morning, a full 58 hours. During that time, my generator kept running, my cord stayed orange and visible, and half the neighborhood benefited from it. People brought me ice cream from their freezers before it melted, gave me gift cards, offered to pay me. I didn't take payment, but I appreciated the recognition. True to his word, Kenneth must have pushed Brenda, because on Saturday evening I received an email from the HOA official address. It was a formal notification that the generator cord color requirement had been rescinded by unanimous board vote. It included an apology for the overreach and a check number for reimbursement of my legal consultation fee. Monday morning, power came back on. I disconnected all my cords, rolled them up, and stored them neatly in my garage where they stayed ready for the next emergency. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, Tom called me sounding concerned. "Henry, you need to come to tonight's HOA meeting. Something's up." "What do you mean?" "Just trust me. 7 o'clock. Be there." I showed up at the clubhouse that evening and found it more packed than I'd ever seen it. At least 30 homeowners were there, which was triple the usual attendance. Brenda sat at her table looking furious, and Susan and Derek looked uncomfortable. Tom waved me over to a seat he'd saved. "This is going to be interesting," he whispered. Brenda called the meeting to order and went through the standard opening business. Then came the bombshell. "Before we proceed to new business," she announced, "I want to address some rumors that have been circulating. It has come to my attention that certain homeowners are spreading false information about the board's actions regarding generator equipment." A woman in the front row raised her hand. I recognized her as Patricia Chen, who lived on the next street over. "Brenda, are you referring to the fact that you tried to ban Henry Xavier's generator cords and then asked him for power during the outage? That is a gross oversimplification of the situation." Another voice, this one from Jim Patterson, a retired teacher. "Actually, that's exactly what happened. My wife and I watched the whole thing. You had him running one of those orange cords you'd been threatening to fine him over straight to your house." Murmuring spread through the crowd. Brenda banged her gavel. The board acted within its authority to establish community standards. The subsequent rescission of that particular guideline was based on practical considerations that came to light. "Practical considerations like needing help," Patricia said. "Brenda, you tried to fine this man $100 per day for having safety equipment that ended up helping a dozen families during the outage." Susan, the vice president, spoke up. "In fairness, we didn't anticipate an emergency situation when we voted on the aesthetic guidelines." Tom stood up. "That's the problem right there. You didn't anticipate consequences because you were making up rules that weren't in the covenants. I've lived here since this subdivision was built, and we've never had issues like this until Brenda took over as president." "That's out of order," Brenda said, banging her gavel. "No, it's not," said a voice from the back. It was Kenneth Morrison, Brenda's husband. Everyone turned to look at him. He was standing with his arms crossed, looking unhappy. "Kenneth, this isn't appropriate," Brenda said. "Neither is what you've been doing. Folks, I apologize. I didn't know the extent of how my wife was running this board until the power outage. When Henry Xavier connected power to our house with the very equipment Brenda had been trying to ban, I did some digging. Turns out this wasn't the only arbitrary rule she's been pushing." He pulled out some papers. "In the last 3 months, Brenda has sent violation notices to 14 different homeowners for things that aren't actually in the covenants. She's threatened fines totally over $20,000 for violations that don't exist." The room erupted in overlapping conversations. Brenda's face went pale. "That's not true," she said, but her voice was weak. Patricia stood up. "I got one of those notices. You said my front yard rock landscaping was the wrong color. Cost me $1,500 to replace it with your approved color." "Me too," said another man. "You said my garage door was non-compliant even though it's the same one that came with the house when it was built." Kenneth continued. "And here's the really interesting part. When I looked at where those homeowners paid their fines, they all went to a separate account, not the main HOA account, an account controlled solely by Brenda." The room went silent. Derek, the treasurer, spoke up. "What?" "All fines are supposed to go through me to the main account." "They're supposed to," Kenneth said. "They didn't. Brenda's been collecting fines for fake violations and keeping the money in a separate account." Brenda stood up abruptly. "This is slander. Kenneth, how dare you?" "It's not slander if it's true. I have bank statements. You've collected over $12,000 in the last 3 months alone." Tom turned to me. "Holy shit," he whispered. A man I didn't know stood up. "That's embezzlement. That's a crime." "It's a misunderstanding," Brenda said, grabbing her purse. "The account was for special projects." "What special projects?" Susan asked. "Everything goes through the treasurer for approval. I never approved any special projects. I don't have to explain myself to you people." Brenda started toward the door. Kenneth blocked her path. "Actually, you do. I've already contacted the Arizona Department of Real Estate and filed a complaint. They're investigating the HOA's finances." "You did what?" Brenda's voice was shrill now. "What I should have done when I first found out. And Henry, I'm sorry. I didn't know she'd been sending attorney letters from my firm. That was completely inappropriate, and I've withdrawn the firm from representing the HOA." I nodded, not sure what to say. Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police. If she stole money from homeowners, that's theft." "Don't be ridiculous," Brenda said, but she was backing toward the door now. Two things happened simultaneously. First, Patricia did call the police, putting her phone on speaker as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. Second, Tom walked over and quietly stood in front of the other exit, boxing Brenda in. He was retired military, and something about his posture said she wasn't leaving. "Everyone stay calm," Kenneth said. "Brenda, sit down. We're going to wait for the police and sort this out properly." "I'm your wife, Kenneth. You're taking their side." "I'm taking the side of what's legal and right. You committed fraud, Brenda. You made up violations, collected money, and kept it. That's not a gray area." She sat down heavily, and the anger seemed to drain out of her, replaced by something that looked like panic. The police arrived about 15 minutes later, 2 officers from the Phoenix PD. They took statements from Kenneth, from Derek the treasurer, from Patricia and the other homeowners who'd paid fines. They took copies of the bank statements Kenneth had brought. They asked Brenda for her side of the story, and she refused to speak without an attorney present, which was probably smart. They didn't arrest her that night, but they did inform her that she was under investigation for theft and fraud. They told her not to leave the state and to expect follow-up from detectives. After they left, the HOA meeting reconvened, and the first order of business was a motion to remove Brenda as president. It passed unanimously, with only Brenda abstaining. Tom was elected temporary president until a proper election could be held. His first official act was to void all violation notices issued in the last 6 months and to authorize refunds to anyone who'd paid fines during that period. Over the next few weeks, the story got more complicated. The Arizona Department of Real Estate launched a formal investigation. Turns out Brenda had been even more creative than Kenneth initially discovered. She'd been not only collecting fake fines, but also inflating quotes for legitimate maintenance work and pocketing the difference. The total amount of money she'd misappropriated was over $35,000. In early August, Brenda was formally charged with fraud, theft, and embezzlement. Kenneth filed for divorce and moved out of their house. The HOA hired a forensic accountant to untangle the finances, and homeowners started getting refund checks. Brenda's trial was scheduled for the following spring, but her attorney negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to 1 count of theft and 2 counts of fraud. In October 2025, she was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and ordered to pay full restitution plus penalties, totaling nearly $50,000. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Tom did a good job as president, mostly by doing very little and letting people live their lives. The HOA went back to focusing on actual covenant enforcement, real issues like people parking commercial trucks on the street or letting their yards turn into deserts. As for me, I kept running my woodworking business. My orange generator cords stayed visible whenever I needed them, and nobody ever said a word. In fact, during the next monsoon in July, when power went out again, I had neighbors asking in advance if I could help them out. I did, because that's what neighbors do. The whole situation taught me something important about HOAs and people in general. Most folks just want to live their lives in peace, But give someone a little authority and some people will abuse it. Brenda wasn't evil exactly. She was insecure and wanted control, and the HOA presidency gave her a way to exercise power over other people. When that power wasn't enough, she found ways to profit from it. The irony is that if she'd just left well enough alone, if she'd never tried to ban my generator cords, none of this would have come out. She'd still be HOA president, still embezzling money, and nobody would have looked closely at what she was doing. But her obsession with enforcing made-up rules led directly to her downfall. Kenneth Morrison actually apologized to me personally a few weeks after everything went down. We met for coffee at a place near his new apartment. "I should have paid more attention," he said. "She'd been getting more controlling at home too, but I didn't connect the dots." "Not your fault, man. You did the right thing in the end. I cost you time and stress, though. The legal letters, the threats, that came from my firm because she asked and I didn't ask enough questions." Water under the bridge. You made it right. He insisted on buying me lunch and told me if I ever needed legal work done, his firm would do it pro bono. I appreciated the offer but hoped I'd never need it. The story spread through Phoenix HOA circles like wildfire. I started getting calls from local news stations wanting to interview me about HOA overreach. I declined most of them, but I did do one interview with a local investigative reporter who was doing a series on HOA abuse in Arizona. That piece aired in November and apparently led to several other investigations into problematic HOAs around the state. Tom told me that our HOA got inquiries from at least 50 other homeowners in different subdivisions who wanted to know how they could challenge their own HOAs. It became this weird thing where our neighborhood was known as the place that took down a corrupt HOA president. In December, the HOA held elections for a new permanent board. Tom declined to run, saying he'd done his duty and wanted to retire from community politics. A group of younger homeowners stepped up, people who wanted to make sure what happened with Brenda never happened again. They ran on a platform of transparency, minimal interference, and actually following the covenants as written. They won easily, and one of their first acts was to amend the HOA bylaws to require financial audits every quarter, board meetings recorded and posted online, and a formal complaint process where homeowners could challenge any violation notice. They also implemented term limits for board members and required all rule changes to be approved by a vote of the full membership, not just the board. The new president was a woman named Rachel who worked as an engineer and had 3 kids. She was practical, no nonsense, and made it clear that the HOA existed to maintain common areas and enforce clear rules, not to micromanage people's lives. Under the new board, life in Sagebrush Heights improved dramatically. People actually started attending HOA meetings because they were transparent and productive. The budget was published online with full details. When there were disputes, they were handled fairly and according to actual covenant language. My generator cords, those orange symbols of the whole fiasco, continued to serve me and my neighbors well. During a particularly bad storm in January 2026, I had power to 5 different houses. People brought me homemade food, beer, gift cards. One family made me a wooden plaque that said Sagebrush Heights Power Company with a carving of an orange extension cord. It hangs in my shop. Brenda started her prison sentence in November 2025. I don't take pleasure in that, honestly. She made bad choices and paid the consequences. Her life fell apart over her need to control things that didn't matter. There's something sad about that. Kenneth ended up being a decent guy once he wasn't under Brenda's influence. He helped the new HOA board navigate some legal complexities with the refunds and restitution process. Last I heard, he was dating someone from his office and seemed happier. The Henderson family, whose pergola project started this whole thing in a way, brought me a bottle of expensive bourbon at Christmas. If you hadn't been working on our pergola with those orange cords visible, none of this would have started, Mr. Henderson said. You accidentally saved this neighborhood. I was just trying to run my business. Exactly. You were living your life and Brenda couldn't stand it. You exposed her by just existing. That's kind of beautiful. I wouldn't call it beautiful, but I understood what he meant. Sometimes standing your ground on principle has consequences you never anticipated. My woodworking business continued to thrive. The publicity from the HOA situation actually brought me new customers. People liked the story of the guy who stood up to his HOA and accidentally uncovered corruption. I got commissioned for several high-end furniture pieces and hired an assistant to help with the workload. The orange generator cords became something of a neighborhood icon. During Halloween, someone put up decorations with orange lights that wound through their yard and left a note on my door saying, "In honor of the cords that saved us." It was silly and sweet. In February 2026, I got a letter from the Arizona Department of Real Estate thanking me for my role in exposing HOA fraud. They'd used the Brenda Morrison case as a catalyst for investigating other HOAs and had uncovered several other instances of financial mismanagement. The letter said my willingness to stand up to arbitrary rules had led to meaningful reform. That felt good. Not because I wanted recognition, but because something positive came from all the hassle. Other homeowners in other subdivisions were being protected from similar abuse because one person in Phoenix decided that orange extension cords mattered. Tom and I became better friends through all of this. We started having weekly barbecues, rotating between our houses, usually inviting a few other neighbors. It built community in a way that no HOA rule ever could. People looked out for each other. When Mrs. Martinez's car broke down, 3 neighbors offered rides. When the Patels went on vacation, their lawn got watered. Real community, not enforced compliance. The generator sat behind my garage, ready for the next monsoon season. It was more than just backup power now. It was a symbol of preparedness, of caring about your neighbors, of practical solutions to real problems. Those orange cords represented safety and community support, not violations. I never did paint them white. In April, the new HOA board organized a neighborhood block party, the first one in years. Everyone came. There was food, music, kids running around, people actually talking to each other. Rachel, the new president, gave a short speech about community values and moving forward together. At the end of her speech, she said, "And special thanks to Xavier, whose stubborn refusal to accept arbitrary rules reminded us all what actually matters in a neighborhood." People applauded. It was embarrassing and nice at the same time. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good, man." I just wanted to keep my extension cords. Yeah, but sometimes standing up for something small means standing up for something big. You showed everyone that you don't have to just accept it when someone in authority abuses their power. Maybe he was right. I don't think of myself as some kind of activist or crusader. I'm just a guy who makes furniture and wants to be left alone to do my work. But when pushed, I pushed back and it mattered. The final chapter of the Brenda Morrison saga came in late April when the last of the restitution payments was distributed. Everyone who'd paid illegal fines got their money back with interest. The HOA's finances were clean and transparent. The forensic accounting had cost money, but the new board considered it money well spent to restore trust. As for my business, I expanded into a second garage bay and bought new equipment. The generator got an upgrade too, a larger unit that could power even more capacity. I figured if I was going to be the neighborhood backup power source, I might as well do it right. The installation company that did the work took pictures for their website, using my setup as an example of proper residential generator installation. Those orange cords remained a fixture whenever I needed them. They ran across my yard, across my driveway, to my shop, wherever I needed power. They were bright and visible and safe and useful. They were exactly what they needed to be, regardless of what any HOA president thought about aesthetics. In late spring, as monsoon season approached again, several neighbors asked me for advice on getting their own generators. I helped 3 families choose appropriate systems and recommended the same installation company I'd used. By June, our little street had 4 houses with backup power. It felt good knowing that the next storm wouldn't leave people helpless. The first monsoon of the 2026 season hit in mid-June, a solid storm that knocked out power for about 20 hours. My generator kicked on flawlessly. So did the Chens next door and the Hendersons down the street. We all helped our immediate neighbors who didn't have generators. It was a coordinated community effort, people sharing resources and looking out for each other. Brenda Morrison would have hated it. All those orange cords running everywhere, visible from the street, functional and messy and real. But Brenda wasn't around to complain. She was serving her sentence, hopefully learning something about consequences and control. I'd like to say I forgave her completely, but honestly, I'm still a little annoyed when I think about all the time and stress she caused over something so pointless. But I don't wish her harm. I hope she serves her time, pays her debt to society, and comes out a better person. Maybe prison will teach her that you can't control everything, and that's okay. For my part, life in Sagebrush Heights settled into a comfortable routine. I ran my business, helped my neighbors, attended the occasional HOA meeting when something interesting was on the agenda. The new board was competent and boring, which was exactly what an HOA should be. My orange generator cords hung in my garage, coiled neatly on their hooks, ready for the next time they were needed. They'd been through a lot, those cords. They'd powered refrigerators and fans, saved medication and food, connected neighbors in crisis. They'd been the focal point of an absurd HOA rule and the catalyst for uncovering corruption. They were just extension cords, orange commercial-grade electrical cables designed to carry current safely from point A to point B. But they'd become something more, at least in my neighborhood. They represented standing up for common sense, refusing arbitrary authority, and helping your neighbors when it mattered. Sometimes I'd look at them and smile, thinking about how something so simple had caused such chaos and ultimately led to positive change. If someone had told me when I bought them that these particular cords would lead to an HOA president going to prison, I never would have believed it. But life's funny that way. You make choices based on what seems practical and right, and sometimes those choices have consequences that ripple far beyond what you imagined. I bought orange cords because they were safe and visible. I refused to replace them because the rule was arbitrary. I helped my neighbors because that's what decent people do. And somehow, all of that led to justice and reform and a better community. As summer settled over Phoenix, bringing its relentless heat and afternoon storms, I felt grateful. Grateful for my generator, for my orange cords, for good neighbors, for a reformed HOA that minded its own business. Grateful that, when I'd been tested, I'd stood my ground on something that mattered. The generator hummed quietly behind my garage, ready for the next outage. The cords hung in their place, bright orange and proudly visible. And Sagebrush Heights went about its business, a little wiser about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of community over control. I never did get around to replacing those cords with gray ones. Why would I? They were perfect exactly as they were.